I woke up a little bit earlier this morning so I could get outside and do a walk and talk before it got too hot. This is the time of the year when the irises are fading and the spider lilies are fading, vines are kicking into high gear, and April is turning to May and spring to summer. I saw a black squirrel this morning. Don't see those a lot here. A few days ago, I saw a river otter, a rabbit, some deer, and a pile of black bear droppings with berries in them. So it's always a surprise what I find on my morning walks. I like this format of the walk and talk because I don't have to script anything and I just do it off the cuff. So here goes. I generally have a topic and then I just expand on it without thinking about it too much. And today I wanted to talk about my new job. I say my new job as if I think people might hear that and I think most doctors would, have one job. And so when people hear that I have a new job, they often think I'm stopping my other jobs. But as an independent doctor, I've always had several jobs that are kind of happening at the same time. Some more than others. It changes all the time. And basically there are, I guess, three factors that I take into consideration. So one is, I have to pay the rent. So I have to have some kind of steady work that pays the bills. May not be the most fun, but, got to pay the rent. The other thing that I think is important is to honor your passion. And if you can find work in that, then that's a bonus. And then the third thing would be some way to give back or to address the, overwhelming need that's out there. And so since I've been working as a doctor, I've tried to kind of keep those three things in mind and then fashion a constellation of jobs that will address all of those things, and then keep flexible, and as things change, just kind of roll with it. So my new job is an additional job to what I'm already doing. So I'm going to be doing the same things. I'm just adding another job. I've always had, at least two jobs ever since I finished my training. I've always devoted at least 25 hours a week to writing, which you can call it a job, not necessarily a job, nor should it be. And certainly I wrote, 20 hours a week for 15 years before I was ever paid for it. Again, that's not the point of any occupation or vocation, is not necessarily to be financially compensated for it. There are other rewards that come with it. And so I will be continuing to write for tourism. I will be continuing my job at the Community Health Center in the Central Coast of California, which is a medically underserved area. And my new job will be with Louisiana brain injury specialists And this is an interesting job that was oddly right up my alley. I've always had my eyes out on the job landscape to see what's coming up and how I might fit in with that or not. And this was something that really was a perfect fit for me, and I'll tell you a little bit more about why. So in my previous videos, I talked about starting work in brain injury and really understanding that there's just a huge unmet need for services for people with brain injury. And so I became involved in brain injury rehabilitation, and as part of that, a lot of people who have sustained a brain injury are involved in some kind of litigation. The most common scenario is someone with a more mild brain injury, and I use the word mild lightly because any brain injury, even a mild one, can be life-changing. But along the spectrum of brain injury, you have mild, moderate, and severe. So a mild brain injury would be a concussion, which most people recover from and do well, although the effects of a mild brain injury are not trivial and should not be regarded as such. And it's actually a huge problem worldwide. The effects of brain injury cause an enormous amount of suffering, loss of wages. Often family members will have to step in to provide care. So there's this ripple effect. They can be associated with what could be described as, mental health issues. It is often a lifelong diagnosis, so people can improve, people can adapt and compensate, but often they are left with lifelong impairments. And so that's, a tough thing. And I think a lot of physicians, just speaking from the perspective of the patients that I've seen and their efforts to find a doctor to provide care for them, people with brain injury often fall between the cracks. A neurologist might see them but not have a lot of interest in following them for the long term because there's nothing they can do. They might not want to see them because there are considerable psychiatric components, and so that's a psych thing. But psychiatrists maybe won't want to see them either because it's a neurologic thing. So there's this chasm in between the specialties, which of course are artificial anyway. The distinction between a psychiatrist and a neurologist is often based more on just historical accident than anything. Just to give you one example, schizophrenia is treated by a psychiatrist, even though with advances in brain imaging, we know that schizophrenia is a brain disorder. But they ended up under the care of psychiatrists because at the time we didn't know, the imaging did not show any abnormalities. And so these specialties can often end up being ways to exclude people from your care. Anyway, so I step into this void, this need, and a lot of my patients are involved in, lawsuits. And I had to become comfortable with being deposed, with sitting for depositions, which just means that, the medical notes that I wrote would be reviewed line by line by an attorney, often a very combative attorney. You know, why did you say this? What proof do you have for that? The typical scenario with someone who has a brain injury is that they're not believed, or they're dismissed, or their impairments are minimized. Very common scenario. And in a situation where a person's MRI is unremarkable, as we say, it's normal, yet there are quite significant impairments, an attorney opposed to the patient might say, well, you're just faking it. You look fine to me. What's the big deal? Get out of here. And from my perspective, spending a lot of time with these people and seeing the real life impact of their brain injuries, it's so clear that they're not just making it up. Their injuries have had a major impact on their quality of life, their ability to be independent, their need for assistance and other services. And so I have, along the way, become involved in a lot of litigation, typically on the side of the patient, who almost exclusively are not being given the, their impairments are not taken as seriously as they should be. And a lot of doctors feel very uncomfortable in that setting. They don't want to be involved in anything regarding lawsuits. But the way that I came to see it is that, people need an advocate. They need a doctor to support them, to, undergo depositions and to put themselves in that position, because there's always going to be someone on the other side, often with a lot more financial resources, to argue against the patient. So if a physician does not step into that role, then you're not going to get what you need. Your brain injury is not going to be seen as important or worthy of financial compensation. And so I have, one of my jobs over the last few years has been to travel to different places and evaluate people. I went to Dallas last year to see a patient who had been injured while incarcerated. And there was no one, in Dallas area who wanted to take on the case. And so they cast a wider net, and then I was happy to travel there. So there's always been work in that area. And so when I saw that there was a position in Lafayette with Louisiana brain injury specialists, in the personal injury space, then I thought this was a great fit and something to add to my collection of jobs. So basically what it involves is when a person is injured, has a brain injury, a concussion, and they are involved in some kind of litigation, Louisiana brain injury specialists, under the direction of Dr. Scott Clark, has set up a kind of state-of-the-art system for evaluating these people, for treating them, and then ultimately advocating for them in legal situations and fighting for them. And the best way that you can fight for people who have had a brain injury is to accurately evaluate them. So it starts with an evaluation, and the earlier after the injury, the better. Because a lot of the memories of the accident fade in time, and the most important thing to determine the severity of a brain injury is what happened right after the injury. What was a person confused? Did they lose consciousness? For how long? What kind of symptoms did they have? Headaches, nausea, dizziness. And so the longer you go after that injury, the more information that you lose. And having people try to shoehorn themselves into the current healthcare system, which is not set up for this, which is a nightmare in general, much less if you have a brain injury, much less if you say, I am going to be involved in a lawsuit. A lot of doctors would just say, sorry, go somewhere else. So what we're doing is setting up kind of the state of the art in evaluation, having a very accessible clinic that people can come to as soon as possible, get a neurologic evaluation, including an examination, a careful history that's taken, that is supplemented with imaging, MRI, DTI, which is kind of a more sophisticated form of MRI, neurodiagnostics, which are computer-aided tools that can help to assess someone after a concussion. For example, by measuring their eye movements, how quickly they're able to shift attention and pay attention to different things, assess processing speed. These are tools that have been developed often for, in the case of people who've sustained injuries with like sports injuries, football games, soccer, that kind of thing. And so we're building a practice where we can get in early, have good evaluations for these people, a very comprehensive evaluation. We can follow them over the long term. We can collect a lot of data. We can build a very strong case, and then we can go and fight on their behalf.